The marble steps beneath my body felt like ice against my skin as I lay there, staring up at the ornate chandelier that had watched over the Blackwood family for 3 generations. Blood trickled from a gash above my left eyebrow, and my right shoulder screamed with a pain so sharp it made my vision blur. But it wasn't the physical agony that made my stomach turn. It was the sound of my Uncle Marcus's voice echoing down from the landing above, already crafting his version of what had just happened. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Oh my God, Sophia fell down the stairs. Someone call an ambulance. His voice carried that perfect note of panic and concern that would fool anyone who hadn't felt his hands against their back just moments before. Anyone who hadn't seen the cold calculation in his eyes as he made sure no one else was around. Anyone who hadn't heard him whisper, "This family doesn't need you anymore," just before he pushed. My name is Sophia Blackwood, and I'm 28 years old. What you're about to hear is the story of how my own family tried to literally push me out of our multi-million-dollar hospitality empire, and how the very security system I had installed to protect them ended up protecting me instead. 6 months before that terrible moment on the stairs, I had been standing in the exact same spot, but for an entirely different reason. I was overseeing the installation of a comprehensive security upgrade throughout Blackwood Manor, the sprawling estate that served as both our family home and the headquarters for Blackwood Hospitality Group. The company my great-grandfather had started with a single inn had grown into a network of luxury hotels and resorts across the Northeast, worth approximately $47 million. I had returned from London 18 months earlier with a master's degree in hospitality management and a head full of ideas about modernizing our family business. My grandmother Eleanor, the family matriarch, who still controlled 60% of the company's shares, had welcomed me back with enthusiasm that surprised everyone, including myself. She had always been fond of me, her only granddaughter, but I hadn't expected her to immediately name me as director of operations and begin grooming me to eventually take over the entire company. That decision had not gone over well with certain members of the family, particularly my father's younger brother Marcus and his son Devin. Marcus had been running day-to-day operations for the past 8 years, ever since my father died in a skiing accident when I was 24. He had naturally assumed that he would inherit control of the company when grandmother Eleanor eventually stepped down. Devin, who was 3 years older than me and had been working in various departments since college, had harbored similar expectations about his future role in the family business. But grandmother had other plans. During our first family dinner after my return, she had made her intentions crystal clear. Sophia has the education, the vision, and the passion this company needs to thrive in the next century, she had announced, her voice carrying that tone of absolute authority that had made hardened business executives quake in their boots for decades. She's already identified 12 areas where we can improve efficiency and increase revenue. Marcus, I want you to work closely with her to implement these changes. The look that passed between Marcus and Devin that night should have warned me of what was coming. It was a look of calculation, resentment, and something darker that I chose not to acknowledge at the time. I was too excited about my new role, too focused on proving myself worthy of grandmother's faith in me. Over the following months, I threw myself into modernizing Blackwood hospitality with an enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. I negotiated new contracts with suppliers that saved us 8% on food costs across all properties. I implemented a digital reservation system that increased booking efficiency by 35%. I developed partnerships with local artisans and businesses that enhanced the authentic experience we offered guests while supporting the communities where our hotels operated. Most importantly, I identified a merging trend in luxury ecotourism that I was convinced would be the future of our industry. I spent weeks developing a proposal for converting 3 of our older properties into environmentally sustainable luxury retreats. The investment would be significant, approximately $12 million, but the projected returns were extraordinary. Conservative estimates suggested we could recoup the investment within 4 years while positioning Blackwood Hospitality as a leader in sustainable luxury tourism. Grandmother Eleanor loved the proposal. She scheduled a board meeting for the first week of October to formally approve the project and announce increased responsibilities for me, including the title of Executive Vice President. It was a promotion that would put me directly in line to succeed her as CEO within the next 3 to 5 years. Marcus and Devin's response to this news was measured but telling. They congratulated me publicly while raising subtle questions about the financial risks of such a significant investment during uncertain economic times. They suggested that perhaps we should focus on maximizing revenue from our existing properties before venturing into new market segments. Their concerns were reasonable on the surface, which made them all the more dangerous. What I didn't realize at the time was that they had been conducting their own quiet campaign among the other board members. Marcus had been having private conversations with his sister Patricia, who owned 15% of the company shares, and with Jonathan Hartwell, a longtime family friend who controlled another 10%. He was carefully planting seeds of doubt about my experience and judgment while positioning himself as the stable, conservative choice to lead the company through challenging times. The security upgrade I had commissioned was part of my broader effort to modernize our operations and protect our valuable assets. Blackwood Manor housed not only our family, but also our corporate offices, which contained sensitive financial information, client records, and strategic planning documents. The estate's existing security system was woefully outdated, consisting mainly of basic door alarms and a few ancient cameras that barely functioned. I hired Meridian Security Solutions, a highly regarded firm that specialized in comprehensive protection for high-net-worth families and their businesses. Their proposal included motion sensors throughout the manor, upgraded locks on all entry points, a sophisticated alarm system with direct connection to local law enforcement, and most importantly, a network of high-definition cameras with night vision capabilities that would monitor both interior and exterior spaces. The camera system was particularly advanced, featuring artificial intelligence that could distinguish between family members, staff, and potential intruders. It included facial recognition software that would alert security personnel to any unauthorized individuals on the property. The system also had the capability to detect unusual movement patterns or behavior that might indicate criminal activity or other security concerns. Marcus had initially objected to the expense, arguing that the existing security measures were adequate and that the money would be better spent on property improvements that directly generate revenue. But Grandmother Eleanor supported the upgrade wholeheartedly. She had lived through 3 burglary attempts over the years and understood the importance of protecting both our family and our business assets. The installation process took 2 weeks, during which technicians worked throughout the manor, placing cameras in hallways, common areas, entryways, and staircases. The main staircase, with its sweeping marble steps and valuable artwork, was considered a particular security priority. 2 cameras were positioned to provide complete coverage of the staircase from different angles, ensuring that any incident or intrusion would be thoroughly documented. I was fascinated by the technology and spent considerable time with the lead technician learning how the system functioned and how to access the recordings if necessary. The footage was stored on secure servers with multiple backup systems, and access was restricted to designated family members and security personnel. I was given administrative privileges, which allowed me to review recordings and modify system settings as needed. During the testing phase, we discovered that the artificial intelligence component was remarkably sophisticated. It could identify individual family members based on their facial features, body language, and movement patterns. It could detect when someone appeared distressed or was moving in an unusual manner. Most intriguingly, it could analyze behavioral patterns and flag interactions that seemed suspicious or potentially threatening. The system went live on September 15th, exactly 3 weeks before the board meeting where Grandmother Eleanor planned to announce my promotion.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
For those 3 weeks, life at Blackwood Manor continued its normal rhythm. I worked long hours refining my ecotourism proposal and preparing for the transition to my new role. Marcus and Devin maintained their professional facades while quietly building opposition to my promotion among the board members. Looking back now, I can see signs of the growing tension that I missed at the time. Devin had become increasingly critical of my decisions, questioning my judgment in small ways that gradually undermined my confidence. Marcus had started having private meetings with other family members, ostensibly about routine business matters, but always excluding me from the discussions. There were also subtle changes in the household dynamic. Staff members who had always been friendly toward me became more reserved, as if they had received instructions to maintain professional distance. Family dinners became stilted affairs, where conversation focused on safe, neutral topics rather than the business discussions that had previously dominated our meals. Most telling of all, both Marcus and Devin had begun asking detailed questions about the new security system. They wanted to know about camera locations, recording schedules, and access procedures. At the time, I assumed their interest stemmed from legitimate security concerns, but their questions were oddly specific and persistent. The night before the board meeting, I was in my office until nearly midnight, making final adjustments to my presentation. The ecotourism proposal represented everything I hoped to achieve with Blackwood Hospitality: growth, innovation, and positioning for long-term success. I was confident that the board would approve the project and my promotion, despite the subtle resistance I had sensed from some family members. As I finally made my way to my bedroom on the second floor, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction and anticipation. Tomorrow would mark a new chapter in both my life and the history of our family business. I was about to step into a role I had dreamed of since childhood, with the full support and confidence of the woman I admired most in the world. What I didn't know was that Marcus and Devin had spent that same evening finalizing their own plans for the next day. They had secured commitments from Patricia and Jonathan Hartwell to vote against both my promotion and the ecotourism project. They had prepared their own proposal for a conservative growth strategy that would maintain existing revenue streams without the risks associated with my ambitious expansion plans. More ominously, they had also discussed what they euphemistically called contingency measures in case the vote didn't go their way. Marcus had studied the new security system extensively and believed he had identified blind spots and vulnerabilities that could be exploited if necessary. He was convinced that Grandmother Eleanor's favoritism toward me was a temporary aberration that could be corrected with the right pressure applied at the right moment. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just my future with Blackwood Hospitality, but the entire trajectory of our family legacy. What none of us could have predicted was how the very technology I had installed to protect our family would ultimately expose the darkest intentions of those I trusted most. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon, allowing time for the quarterly financial reports to be reviewed and discussed before moving on to strategic planning items. I woke that morning with nervous energy and spent extra time preparing my presentation materials and rehearsing my key talking points. This was my moment to prove that I deserved the responsibilities Grandmother Eleanor wanted to give me. The morning passed in a blur of final preparations and casual conversations with board members as they arrived at the manor. Patricia seemed distracted and avoided making direct eye contact with me, which I attributed to her general discomfort with business meetings. Jonathan Hartwell was his usual jovial self, though I detected a slight strain in his manner that I couldn't quite identify. Marcus and Devin were the picture of professionalism, arriving early to help set up the conference room and greeting other board members with their characteristic charm. If I hadn't known them so well, I might have missed the undercurrent of anticipation that surrounded them, as if they were waiting for something significant to happen. At exactly 2 o'clock, Grandmother Eleanor called the meeting to order. The first hour proceeded normally, with standard reports on occupancy rates, revenue figures, and operational updates from various department heads. My own report on the modernization initiatives was well received, with several board members commenting positively on the measurable improvements in efficiency and customer satisfaction. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Grandmother Eleanor asked me to present the ecotourism proposal that would, if approved, represent the largest single investment in the company's recent history and establish me as the clear successor to lead Blackwood Hospitality into the future. I stood up confidently and began my presentation, explaining the market research that supported the viability of sustainable luxury tourism and detailing the specific improvements planned for each of the 3 properties. I presented financial projections, architectural drawings, and testimonials from industry experts who endorsed the concept. For 45 minutes, I laid out a comprehensive vision for how Blackwood Hospitality could capture a growing market segment while reinforcing our commitment to environmental responsibility. The response was mixed, but generally positive. Two board members asked detailed questions about implementation timelines and return on investment calculations. Another expressed enthusiasm for the environmental benefits and the positive publicity the project would generate. Even Patricia seemed intrigued by the potential for attracting younger, more environmentally conscious travelers. Then Marcus stood up to respond. His objections were measured and seemingly reasonable. He questioned whether the hospitality industry was stable enough to justify such a large capital expenditure. He suggested that economic uncertainties made it wiser to focus on proven revenue streams rather than experimental ventures. He argued that my relative inexperience with large-scale project management made the investment particularly risky. Each point he raised was logical and professionally presented, but I could sense an underlying agenda that went far beyond financial conservatism. This wasn't just about the ecotourism project, it was about establishing himself as the responsible, experienced leader the company needed while positioning me as an idealistic but impractical dreamer. Devon supported his father's arguments with additional concerns about regulatory compliance, environmental permitting processes, and potential cost overruns. Together, they painted a picture of a project fraught with risks that could endanger the financial stability of the entire company. The mood in my room shifted as other board members began to express their own reservations. Patricia voiced concerns about the debt load the project would require. Jonathan wondered whether we should postpone such ambitious plans until the broader economic outlook became clearer. Even board members who had initially seemed supportive began to hedge their positions. I felt my carefully prepared presentation beginning to crumble as momentum shifted against the proposal. More importantly, I could see that this wasn't really about the ecotourism project at all. It was about whether the board had confidence in my judgment and leadership capabilities. Marcus and Devon had successfully framed the discussion in terms that made supporting the project seem financially irresponsible. Grandmother Eleanor tried to salvage the situation by emphasizing my track record of successful improvements and her own confidence in my abilities. But for the first time in my memory, her authority over the board seemed diminished. The other members were clearly torn between their respect for her judgment and their fear of making a costly mistake. After nearly 2 hours of debate, Marcus called for a formal vote on the proposal. The result was devastating. 4 votes against, 2 in favor, with 1 abstention. Not only had my ecotourism project been rejected, but the vote represented a clear vote of no confidence in my leadership capabilities. Marcus and Devon had successfully framed the discussion in terms that made supporting the project seem financially irresponsible. Grandmother Eleanor tried to salvage the situation by emphasizing my track record of successful improvements and her own confidence in my abilities. But for the first time in my memory, her authority over the board seemed diminished. The other members were clearly torn between their respect for her judgment and their fear of making a costly mistake. After nearly 2 hours of debate, Marcus called for a formal vote on the proposal. The result was devastating. 4 votes against, 2 in favor, with 1 abstention. Not only had my ecotourism project been rejected, but the vote represented a clear vote of no confidence in my leadership capabilities. Grandmother Eleanor looked stunned. In 40 years of leading Blackwood Hospitality, she had rarely faced such direct opposition to her strategic decisions. She attempted to maintain composure, but I could see the shock and disappointment in her eyes. Marcus seized the moment to present his alternative proposal, a conservative growth strategy focused on improving existing properties and maximizing current revenue streams. He suggested that the company should postpone any major new investments until market conditions became more favorable. Most significantly, he recommended that my promotion to executive vice president should be delayed until I gained more experience with practical business management. The board approved his proposal by the same 4-2 margin, effectively blocking my advancement and establishing Marcus as the de facto leader of the company's strategic direction. In the span of 3 hours, I had gone from heir apparent to marginalized family member with little influence over the company's future. The meeting adjourned at 6:30 with polite but strained farewells. Board members avoided making direct eye contact with me as they gathered their materials and prepared to leave. The atmosphere was thick with discomfort and unspoken tensions. Grandmother Eleanor asked me to remain behind as the others departed. When we were alone, she took my hands in hers and spoke in a voice that trembled with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Sophia. I never expected this level of resistance to your leadership. I thought the family would see what I see in you: intelligence, vision, and dedication to our legacy." I tried to reassure her that the setback was temporary, that I would continue working to prove myself worthy of her confidence. But privately, I was devastated. The rejection felt like a repudiation of everything I had worked towards since returning from London. More than that, it felt like a betrayal by people I had trusted to support my dreams. We talked for another hour about possible strategies for moving forward and rebuilding support among the board members. Grandmother suggested that I focus on smaller, less ambitious projects that would demonstrate practical results without requiring significant investment. She promised to continue advocating for my advancement, though her influence was clearly diminished by the day's events. As evening fell over Blackwood Manor, I made my way slowly up the main staircase toward my bedroom on the second floor. The marble steps that I had climbed thousands of times throughout my life suddenly felt unfamiliar and treacherous. The ornate railings and elegant artwork that had always represented the pride and tradition of our family now seemed to mock my failure to live up to their legacy. I was emotionally and physically exhausted from the day's confrontation, but my mind was racing with questions about what had gone wrong and how I might recover from this setback. I was so lost in thought that I didn't immediately notice the footsteps behind me on the staircase. It was Marcus, climbing the stairs with a measured pace that seemed oddly deliberate. When I paused to let him pass, he stopped as well, positioning himself just a few steps below me on the wide marble staircase. "Sophia," he said, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard from him before, cold and oddly satisfied. "I hope you understand that today's vote wasn't personal. The board simply felt that your ideas, while creative, weren't practical for our current situation." I turned to face him, noting something unsettling in his expression. His eyes held a hardness that seemed inconsistent with his conciliatory words. "I understand their concerns," I replied carefully. "I hope we can work together to find approaches that address those issues while still moving the company forward." He smiled, but it was a smile that made my skin crawl. "That's the thing, Sophia. I don't think we can work together. You and I have fundamentally different visions for this company, and only one of us can ultimately prevail." The words hung in the air between us, charged with a menace that made me take a step backward up the staircase. Marcus continued climbing toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. "Your grandmother won't live forever," he continued. "When she's gone, the family will need leadership that understands practical realities rather than idealistic fantasies. Leadership that understands that some people simply don't belong in positions of authority." I felt my heart begin to race as I realized that we were completely alone in this section of the manor. The other family members had retired to their rooms or departed for their own homes. Even the household staff had finished their duties and gone home for the evening. Marcus took another step closer, and I could see something dark and calculating in his eyes that made every instinct I possessed scream danger. This wasn't just about business disagreements or family dynamics. This was about something much more fundamental and threatening. "Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I think you're letting today's events affect your judgment. We're family. We can find a way to work through our differences." He laughed, but it was a sound devoid of humor or warmth. "Family," he repeated, as if the word tasted bitter in his mouth. "You've never really been family, Sophia. You've been Eleanor's pet project, her attempt to skip over the natural order of succession. But today, the family spoke, and they made it clear that they don't share her delusions about your capabilities." I realized with growing horror that Marcus wasn't just angry about the day's events, he was dangerous. The man I had known as my uncle, who had taught me to ride horses and helped me with homework, had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who saw me not as family, but as an obstacle to be removed. I continued backing up the staircase, desperately trying to maintain distance between us while searching for an escape route. But the main staircase was wide and open, with no alcoves or side passages where I might take shelter. My only options were to continue climbing toward the second floor or attempt to rush past Marcus and flee toward the main entrance. As if reading my thoughts, Marcus positioned himself in the center of the staircase, blocking any attempt to escape downward. His smile grew wider as he realized that I was trapped with nowhere to go but up. "The family doesn't need you anymore, Sophia," he said, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone that made his words even more chilling. "Your little modernization projects were nice experiments, but it's time for proven leadership to guide this company forward. It's time for you to step aside." I felt my back touch the wall as I reached a landing halfway up the staircase. Marcus was now only a few steps away from me, close enough that I could see the cold calculation in his eyes, close enough that I realized he had been planning this confrontation, possibly for weeks or months. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "This company needs fresh thinking and new approaches. Grandmother Eleanor recognizes that, even if the board doesn't yet." His expression darkened at the mention of Grandmother Eleanor. "Your grandmother is an old woman whose judgment has been clouded by sentimentality. She'll come to understand that the board's decision was correct, especially after you're no longer here to influence her thinking." The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about forcing me out of the company. He was talking about removing me from the family entirely. The realization that my own uncle was capable of such betrayal was almost as terrifying as the immediate physical threat he represented. I glanced around desperately, looking for anything that might serve as a weapon or provide protection. The marble staircase was elegant but bare, with no furniture or decorative objects within reach. The ornate railing was solid and well built, but offered no means of defense against someone who intended to harm me. Marcus seemed to sense my desperation and took another step closer. Now he was near enough to reach out and touch me, near enough that I could smell his cologne and hear his breathing, near enough to see the absolute lack of remorse or hesitation in his eyes. "This doesn't have to be difficult," he said softly. "Accidents happen in old houses like this. Marble staircases can be treacherous, especially late in the evening when lighting is poor. People slip and fall. Sometimes they're seriously injured. Sometimes they don't survive." The words made my blood turn to ice as I realized he had planned this entire scenario. He had waited until we were alone, positioned himself strategically on the staircase, and was now describing exactly what he intended to do to me. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. It was premeditated murder. I tried to scream, but terror had constricted my throat, and only a weak gasp emerged. Marcus smiled at my helplessness and took the final step that brought him within arm's reach. "This family doesn't need you anymore," he repeated, his voice now a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout could have conveyed. Then his hands shot out toward my shoulders, and I knew with absolute certainty that my life was about to end on the cold marble stairs of my family's ancestral home. The force of Marcus's hands against my shoulders sent me tumbling backward down the marble staircase with a violence that seemed to echo through every bone in my body. Time stretched impossibly as I fell, my mind recording every detail with crystal clarity, even as my body careened helplessly through space. I saw the ornate crown molding blur past my vision, felt the cold marble strike my ribs, my hip, my shoulder in a cascade of impacts that drove the breath from my lungs. When I finally came to rest at the bottom of the staircase, the silence was absolute, except for the ringing in my ears and the sound of my own labored breathing. Pain radiated from a dozen different points on my body, but it was the warm wetness spreading across my forehead that made me understand how serious my injuries were. Blood was flowing freely from a gash above my left eye, and my right shoulder felt as if it had been shattered. Above me, I could hear Marcus's footsteps on the marble landing, deliberate and measured as he made his way down to where I lay crumpled at the bottom of the stairs. For a moment, I thought he was coming to help me, that perhaps the reality of what he had done had shocked him back to his senses. But when I managed to focus my eyes on his face, I saw only satisfaction and cold calculation. He knelt beside me, checking my pulse with the clinical detachment of someone assessing whether his work was complete. When he found that I was still alive, still breathing, I saw a flicker of annoyance cross his features. He glanced around the entrance hall, confirming that we were still alone, then leaned close enough that I could feel his breath against my ear. "You should have taken the hint and walked away quietly," he whispered. "Now look what you forced me to do." I tried to speak, to tell him that people would know what had happened, but only a weak groan escaped my lips. My vocal cords felt bruised, and every breath sent sharp pains through my chest that suggested broken ribs. Marcus interpreted my attempt to speak as a sign that I might survive and recover enough to tell others what had really happened on the staircase. He stood up and looked down at me with the same expression he might have worn while deciding whether to discard a broken piece of furniture. I could see him weighing his options, calculating whether he dared attempt to finish what he had started, or whether the risk of discovery was too great. The decision was made for him when we both heard the sound of a car pulling into the circular driveway outside the manor. Marcus's head snapped toward the front windows, and I saw genuine fear replace the cold confidence that had marked his expression moments before. Someone was arriving unexpectedly, and whoever it was would find me lying broken at the bottom of the staircase with Marcus standing over me. "Stay quiet," he hissed at me, though we both knew I was in no condition to do anything else. "If you tell anyone what really happened, I'll make sure you never get another chance to cause problems for this family." Then he was moving quickly toward the front door, and I heard his voice transform into that perfect tone of panic and concern that had fooled me initially. "Oh my God, Sophia fell down the stairs! Someone call an ambulance!" The next few minutes passed in a haze of pain and confusion as paramedics arrived and began assessing my injuries. I drifted in and out of consciousness as they stabilized me for transport to the hospital, but I was aware enough to hear Marcus giving his version of events to the police officer who had responded with the ambulance. "I was upstairs when I heard a terrible crash," he said. "I rushed down and found her lying here. She must have slipped on the marble. These old staircases can be treacherous, especially in the evening when the lighting isn't optimal." The police officer nodded sympathetically and made notes in his report. It was clearly being treated as an unfortunate accident rather than a criminal investigation. Marcus had positioned himself perfectly, the concerned family member who had discovered the victim, with no witnesses to contradict his account of what had happened. As the paramedics loaded me into the ambulance, I caught a glimpse of Marcus standing in the doorway of Blackwood Manor. For just an instant, when he thought no one else was looking, his mask of concern slipped, and I saw the satisfied smile that revealed his true feelings about my condition. Then the ambulance doors closed, and we were speeding through the night toward the regional trauma center. The next 72 hours were a blur of medical procedures, pain medication, and worried family members taking turns at my bedside. I had suffered a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and deep lacerations that required dozens of stitches. The doctors were amazed that I hadn't sustained more serious injuries, particularly spinal damage, that could have left me paralyzed or worse. Grandmother Eleanor barely left my side during those first critical days. She held my hand and whispered reassurances that everything would be all right, that I would recover fully and return to my rightful place in the family business. But I could see the worry in her eyes, not just about my physical condition, but about the circumstances that had led to my fall. Marcus visited regularly, playing the role of the concerned uncle with consummate skill. He brought flowers and asked detailed questions about my medical care, projecting exactly the right mixture of sympathy and family solidarity. When the doctors discussed my injuries in his presence, he listened with apparent fascination, as if learning about the extent of the damage he had inflicted gave him some form of satisfaction. But it was during one of these visits that I began to understand the full scope of his planning and the danger I still faced. I was heavily sedated, but conscious enough to hear him talking quietly with Devon near the foot of my hospital bed. They thought I was asleep, and their conversation revealed details that made my blood run cold. The board met yesterday while she was in surgery, Devon said, in a voice barely above a whisper. With grandmother distracted by the accident, we were able to pass several resolutions that restructure company leadership. Dad is now officially CEO, and we voted to suspend all modernization projects pending a comprehensive financial review. Marcus nodded with satisfaction. Good. And the ecotourism proposal? Formally rejected and tabled indefinitely. We also passed a resolution requiring board approval for any family member to hold executive positions. Essentially, even if she recovers fully, she won't be able to resume her previous role without our consent. I felt a surge of anger that momentarily overcame the haze of pain medication. While I lay broken in a hospital bed because of Marcus's violence, he and Devon were systematically dismantling everything I had worked to build within the company. They were using my injuries as a distraction to consolidate their control and eliminate any possibility of my return to a position of influence. "What about grandmother?" Marcus asked. "She's going to be furious when she learns what we've done." Devon smiled coldly. "She's an old woman who's been through a traumatic experience. The stress of Sophia's accident has clearly affected her judgment. The board feels that she needs time to recover emotionally before resuming her leadership responsibilities." The implications were staggering. They weren't just pushing me out of the company, they were marginalizing grandmother Eleanor as well, using my accident as justification for seizing complete control of Blackwood hospitality. Marcus had achieved everything he wanted with a single violent act that everyone believed was an unfortunate accident. Over the following days, as my physical condition gradually improved, I began to piece together the full extent of their coup. Marcus had moved quickly to consolidate power, calling emergency board meetings and pushing through resolutions that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. He had presented these changes as necessary temporary measures to ensure business continuity while the family dealt with my medical crisis. The other board members, shocked by my accident and concerned about company stability, had approved his proposals with little discussion. Patricia and Jonathan Hartwell, who had already been swayed by his arguments against my ecotourism project, now saw him as the steady hand needed to guide the company through a difficult period. Most devastatingly, Marcus had used grandmother Eleanor's emotional state to question her fitness for continued leadership. He suggested privately to other family members that the stress of my accident had revealed the fragility of her advanced age and that the company needed younger, more decisive leadership. He positioned himself as the reluctant but necessary choice to protect both the family and the business. When I was finally able to speak clearly enough to tell grandmother Eleanor what had really happened on the staircase, her reaction was everything I had hoped for and feared. The fury in her eyes was magnificent and terrible as I described Marcus's words and actions leading up to my fall. But I could also see the helplessness that came with her realization that she no longer had the power to do anything about it. "He pushed you," she repeated, her voice shaking with rage. "That monster actually pushed you down the stairs." I nodded carefully, mindful of my still healing injuries. "It wasn't an accident, grandmother. He planned it. He waited until we were alone and then threatened me before he pushed me." She was silent for a long moment, her mind working through the implications of what I had told her. "We have to go to the police," she said finally. "This is attempted murder. Marcus cannot be allowed to get away with this." But even as she spoke the words, I could see her understanding the fundamental problem we faced. It would be my word against his, with no witnesses and no physical evidence to support my account of what had happened. Marcus had positioned himself as the concerned family member who had found me after my accident. His version of events had already been accepted by the police, the paramedics, and the hospital staff. "Who's going to believe me?" I asked her. "I was found alone at the bottom of the stairs with Marcus calling for help. He's been playing the worried uncle perfectly ever since. Even if I could prove he pushed me, he could claim it was an argument that got out of hand rather than premeditated attempted murder." Grandmother Eleanor's expression grew more determined. Then we'll find another way to expose him. There has to be evidence somewhere. People don't just decide to commit murder without leaving some kind of trail. I wanted to share her optimism, but I knew Marcus too well. He was methodical and careful, someone who planned extensively before taking action. If he had decided that I needed to be eliminated, he would have thought through every potential consequence and prepared accordingly. More importantly, time was working against us. Every day that passed with Marcus in control of the company made it harder to challenge his authority. He was using his position to reward allies and marginalize potential opponents, building a power base that would be increasingly difficult to dislodge. The reality of our situation became clear during my second week in the hospital when Dr. Harrison, my primary physician, informed me that I would need several months of physical therapy before returning to normal activities. My injuries, while not life-threatening, were severe enough to require extensive rehabilitation. I would be effectively sidelined from any involvement in company affairs for the foreseeable future. Marcus visited that same day, ostensibly to check on my progress, but actually to deliver a message that chilled me to the bone. He waited until we were alone in my hospital room, then pulled his chair close to my bed and spoke in the same quiet tone he had used on the staircase. "I'm glad to see you're recovering so well," he said, his words carrying multiple layers of meaning. "The doctors tell me you'll make a full recovery, though it may take some time before you're back to your normal activities." I stared at him without speaking, not trusting myself to remain calm if I attempted to respond. He continued as if my silence was perfectly natural. "I want you to know that your position at the company will be waiting for you when you're ready to return. Of course, there have been some organizational changes during your absence, but I'm sure we can find an appropriate role for someone with your particular skills and experience." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. He was making it clear that any future role I might have would be entirely at his discretion and would bear no resemblance to the executive position I had held before my accident. "The board has asked me to convey their concern about the stress that company responsibilities might place on your recovery," he continued. "They feel it would be inappropriate to burden you with executive duties while you're still healing from such a traumatic experience." I found my voice at last. How thoughtful of them. Marcus smiled at my response. "We all want what's best for you, Sophia. Family takes care of family, especially during difficult times like these." He stood to leave, then paused as if something had just occurred to him. "Oh, one more thing. The board has decided to review all company security measures in light of your accident. We want to make sure that Blackwood Manor is as safe as possible for everyone who lives and works there. Some of the security upgrades you implemented may need to be modified or removed if they're not serving their intended purpose." My heart began racing as I understood the implication of his words. He was planning to disable or remove the camera system that had recorded our confrontation on the staircase. If such footage existed, it would be destroyed before anyone could review it. "Security is important," I managed to say, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Exactly," Marcus replied, "which is why we need to ensure that all security measures are actually providing protection rather than creating a false sense of security. Some systems that look sophisticated on paper don't actually work as advertised when put to the test." After he left, I lay in my hospital bed staring at the ceiling and trying to process what he had told me. If the security cameras had recorded our confrontation, that footage represented the only evidence that could corroborate my account of what had happened. But Marcus clearly suspected the same thing and was taking steps to eliminate any potential evidence before it could be discovered. I needed to act quickly, but my options were severely limited by my physical condition and my isolation in the hospital. I couldn't return to Blackwood Manor to access the security system myself, and I couldn't trust anyone else in the family to help me without alerting Marcus to my suspicions. That night, as I lay awake wrestling with the problem, I remembered something the security technician had mentioned during the system installation. The cameras were connected to a cloud-based backup service that automatically uploaded footage to secure servers maintained by Meridian Security Solutions. Even if someone tampered with the primary recording equipment at the manor, copies of recent footage would still exist on the company's external servers. More importantly, I still had administrative access to the system through my personal smartphone, which the hospital had returned to me along with my other belongings. The Meridian Security app would allow me to review recent footage and download specific recordings directly to my phone. My hands shook as I navigated to the app and logged in with my administrative credentials. The system interface loaded quickly, showing camera locations throughout Blackwood Manor and indicating that all units were functioning normally. I selected the cameras that covered the main staircase and searched for footage from the evening of my accident. What I found made my breath catch in my throat. Both cameras had captured clear, high-definition video of my confrontation with Marcus, including his threatening words and the moment when he pushed me down the stairs. The footage was damning and unambiguous. It showed attempted murder, not an accidental fall. But as I watched the recording, I realized that Marcus had been partially right about the security system. While the cameras had captured everything, the audio quality was inconsistent due to the acoustics of the marble staircase. His whispered threats were audible but not entirely clear, and a skilled defense attorney might be able to argue that the words were ambiguous or taken out of context. More concerning was the timestamp on the footage, which showed that Marcus's push had occurred at exactly 9:47 in the evening. The police report listed my accident as occurring at approximately 10:15, based on Marcus's call for emergency assistance. The discrepancy suggested that Marcus had waited nearly 30 minutes after pushing me before calling for help, allowing me to lie injured and bleeding while he considered his options. That delay actually strengthened the case against him, proving that his actions were premeditated rather than impulsive. But it also revealed how calculating and ruthless he truly was. He had been willing to let me die slowly at the bottom of the staircase if that served his purposes better than immediate medical attention. I downloaded copies of all the relevant footage to my phone and also forwarded them to a secure email account that Marcus would have no way of accessing. Then I called Detective Morrison, the police officer who had taken the initial report about my accident. Morrison was polite but skeptical when I explained that I had security footage showing that my fall had not been accidental.
He pointed out that I had been severely injured and medicated, which might have affected my memory of events. He also noted that family disputes sometimes led people to interpret ambiguous situations in the worst possible light. "Miss Blackwood," he said patiently, "I understand that you're going through a difficult time, both physically and emotionally. Sometimes when people are hurt, they look for someone to blame, even when what happened was just an unfortunate accident." I insisted that he review the footage I had downloaded, emphasizing that it clearly showed my uncle pushing me rather than helping me, as he had claimed. Morrison agreed to examine the video, though his tone suggested he was humoring me rather than taking my allegations seriously. 2 days later, Detective Morrison returned to the hospital with a very different attitude. The security footage had convinced him that my accusations deserved serious investigation, and he informed me that the case was being reclassified from accidental injury to attempted assault. "The video is quite clear about what happened," he admitted. "Your uncle deliberately pushed you down those stairs after what appears to be a threatening conversation. We'll need to bring him in for questioning and get his side of the story." I felt a surge of relief and vindication, but it was tempered by the knowledge that Marcus would not go quietly. He had already demonstrated his willingness to use violence to protect his interests, and I had no doubt that he would fight the charges with every resource at his disposal. My concerns proved justified when Morrison called me the following day with troubling news. When police had arrived at Blackwood Manor to arrest Marcus, they found that someone had broken into the security equipment room and severely damaged the primary recording servers. The physical evidence that would have supported the charges against him had been destroyed. "Fortunately, you were smart enough to download copies before the system was vandalized," Morrison said. But his lawyer is already arguing that the footage could have been digitally altered and that the chain of custody has been compromised. Marcus had covered his tracks with the same methodical planning he had shown throughout his campaign to take control of the company. Even though we had evidence of his crime, he was making it as difficult as possible to prosecute him successfully. The legal battle that followed was brutal and expensive, with Marcus hiring the most prominent criminal defense attorney in the state. His lawyer argued that the security footage was inconclusive, that the audio was unclear, and that family tensions had led me to misinterpret what was actually a tragic accident. They painted Marcus as a devoted family member who had made sacrifices to keep the company running during difficult times, while portraying me as a bitter and unstable young woman who couldn't accept that her business ideas had been rejected by the board. They suggested that I had fabricated the assault allegations to seek revenge against an uncle who had only tried to provide responsible leadership for the family business. The strategy was effective in creating reasonable doubt about Marcus's guilt, particularly since the physical evidence from the manor had been destroyed. My medical records clearly showed that I had suffered severe injuries consistent with a fall down marble stairs. But proving that those injuries had been caused intentionally rather than accidentally was more challenging. Grandmother Eleanor stood by me throughout the legal proceedings, using her personal resources to hire prosecutors who specialized in assault cases. But even she had to acknowledge that the evidence, while compelling, might not be sufficient to guarantee a conviction. The preliminary hearing stretched over several weeks, with both sides presenting expert testimony about the security footage, my injuries, and the circumstances surrounding my fall. Marcus maintained his innocence throughout, insisting that he had found me after my accident and had immediately called for emergency medical assistance. During his testimony, he painted a picture of a family crisis that had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. He admitted that there had been tensions over my role in the company, but claimed that these were normal business disagreements rather than personal animosity. He expressed deep regret that I had been injured and insisted that he would never harm a member of his own family. His performance on the witness stand was masterful, projecting exactly the right combination of concern, bewilderment, and wounded dignity. I could see some members of the gallery beginning to question whether I might have misunderstood what had happened on that terrible night. But the prosecution had one piece of evidence that Marcus's legal team couldn't explain away entirely. The security system's artificial intelligence component had been analyzing behavioral patterns and interactions among family members for weeks before my accident. Its records showed a clear escalation in what the system classified as threatening behavior from Marcus toward me in the days leading up to our confrontation. The AI had documented instances where Marcus had approached me when I was alone, engaged in conversations that the system flagged as potentially aggressive based on voice stress analysis and body language recognition. Most significantly, it had recorded several occasions where Marcus had specifically inquired about camera locations and recording procedures, suggesting that he was planning some action he wanted to avoid having documented. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a computer forensics expert who specialized in AI security systems, testified about the sophistication of the Meridian Security artificial intelligence and its ability to recognize patterns that might not be obvious to human observers. She explained that the system had been designed specifically to identify potential internal threats and had been functioning exactly as intended when it flagged Marcus's behavior as concerning. The artificial intelligence doesn't lie or misremember, she testified. It simply records and analyzes data based on algorithms designed to recognize threatening behavioral patterns. In this case, the system had identified Mr. Marcus Blackwood as a potential threat to other family members several days before the incident occurred. This testimony was devastating to Marcus's defense because it established a pattern of predatory behavior rather than a single moment of family conflict that had gotten out of hand. The AI records showed that he had been planning something that required avoiding security cameras, and that he had been escalating his threatening behavior toward me over time. Under cross-examination, Marcus's attorney tried to discredit the AI analysis by arguing that computer systems could misinterpret normal family interactions, and that artificial intelligence was not reliable enough to be used as evidence in criminal proceedings. But Dr. Chen's expertise and the detailed nature of the system's documentation made these arguments difficult to sustain. The turning point came when prosecutors presented audio analysis of the security footage that had been enhanced using advanced digital processing techniques. While Marcus's whispered threats had been difficult to understand in the original recording, the enhanced version clearly captured his words. "This family doesn't need you anymore," and "it's time for you to step aside." Most damning of all was the enhanced audio of his final statement before pushing me. "This doesn't have to be difficult. Accidents happen in old houses like this." The processed audio removed any ambiguity about his intentions and his awareness that what he was about to do would be perceived as an accident rather than an assault. When the judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Marcus would face formal charges of attempted assault and battery, but the legal process was far from over. His defense team would have months to prepare their case and find ways to discredit the evidence against him. More immediately, I had to deal with the consequences of the charges becoming public knowledge. The arrest of a prominent business leader for attempting to murder his own niece became a major news story, with reporters descending on Blackwood Manor and camping outside the hospital where I was still recovering. The publicity was devastating for Blackwood Hospitality's reputation. Clients began canceling reservations and terminating contracts as news of the family scandal spread throughout the hospitality industry. Stock prices for companies that did business with us began declining as investors worried about the stability of our organization. Marcus, despite being out on bail and facing serious criminal charges, refused to step down from his position as CEO. He continued to insist on his innocence and claimed that the charges against him were the result of a family dispute that had been blown out of proportion by an unstable family member. The board found itself in an impossible position.
They couldn't ignore the criminal charges against Marcus, but they also couldn't afford to have the company leadership completely paralyzed during a crisis that threatened the survival of the business. Devin attempted to position himself as an interim leader who could provide stability while his father dealt with his legal problems. But the other board members were increasingly reluctant to trust anyone from Marcus's immediate family, given the severity of the charges and the evidence that had been presented during the preliminary hearing. Grandmother Eleanor, despite her advanced age and the stress of recent events, emerged as the only family member with sufficient credibility to lead the company through the crisis. She resumed active control of Blackwood Hospitality and immediately began implementing damage control measures designed to restore client confidence and stabilize company operations. Her first official act was to suspend all of Marcus's policy changes and restore the modernization programs I had initiated before my accident. She also announced that a comprehensive review of company leadership would be conducted once the criminal proceedings were resolved. But the damage to our family's reputation and business relationships was severe. Decades of careful relationship building with clients, partners, and industry organizations had been undermined by the scandal surrounding Marcus's arrest. Even if he was ultimately convicted and removed from any company involvement, the association between Blackwood Hospitality and attempted family murder would be difficult to overcome. As I continued my physical recovery and prepared for the upcoming trial, I found myself grappling with questions that went far beyond the immediate legal and business challenges we faced. How had I so completely misjudged someone I had known my entire life? What signs had I missed that might have warned me of Marcus's capacity for violence? More troubling still was the realization that if not for the security system I had installed, Marcus would have succeeded completely in his plan to eliminate me and seize control of the family business. The very technology that he had questioned and resented had become the instrument of his downfall, but only because I had been fortunate enough to think of checking the recordings before he could destroy them. The trial was scheduled to begin in 3 months, giving both sides time to prepare their cases and allowing me additional time to recover from my injuries. But regardless of the legal outcome, I knew that the Blackwood family would never be the same. Trust had been shattered in ways that could never be fully repaired, and the business that had been built over 3 generations was facing an uncertain future. As I lay in my hospital bed that night, staring out at the city lights and thinking about everything that had happened, I made a promise to myself.
If I survived this ordeal and somehow managed to rebuild what Marcus had tried to destroy, I would make sure that no one else in my family would ever again be vulnerable to the kind of betrayal I had experienced. The technology that had saved me would become the foundation for a new kind of family business, one built on transparency, accountability, and genuine protection for everyone involved. Marcus had taught me that the greatest threats often come from those closest to us, and I intended to build systems that could recognize and neutralize such threats before they could cause irreparable harm. But first, I had to survive the trial and find a way to reclaim not just my family's legacy, but my own future as well. The trial lasted 6 weeks and became a media sensation that transformed our private tragedy into public entertainment. Every day brought new headlines about the Blackwood family scandal, with reporters dissecting every aspect of our business dealings and personal relationships. Photographers camped outside the courthouse, capturing images of Marcus arriving in expensive suits while I appeared with my arms still in a sling and visible scars from my injuries. Marcus's defense team had crafted a narrative that portrayed him as the victim of a vindictive family member who couldn't accept legitimate business decisions. They argued that I had fabricated the assault allegations out of spite and had manipulated the security footage to support my false claims. Their strategy was to paint me as unstable, bitter, and willing to destroy my own family to get revenge for perceived slights. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Sarah Williams, methodically presented the evidence that proved Marcus had planned and executed a deliberate attempt to murder me. The enhanced audio recordings were played repeatedly, each time making Marcus's threatening words clearer and more menacing. The artificial intelligence analysis showed a pattern of escalating aggression that contradicted any claim that the incident was spontaneous or accidental. Dr. Chen returned to testify about the sophisticated nature of the Meridian security system and its ability to detect threatening behavior patterns. She explained that the AI had been monitoring all family interactions for weeks before my accident and had consistently flagged Marcus's behavior as potentially dangerous. The system had documented his inquiries about camera locations, his attempts to access my personal workspace, and his pattern of approaching me when other family members were not present. Most damaging to Marcus's case was the testimony from Linda Peterson, his former assistant, who revealed that he had asked her to research the legal procedures for removing family members from company leadership positions. She had prepared documents outlining various scenarios for forcing out board members and executives, including provisions for cases where individuals were incapacitated by accidents or medical conditions. He was very specific about wanting to understand what would happen if a family member became unable to perform their duties due to injury, Linda testified. He asked me to prepare reports on how quickly leadership transitions could be implemented and what documentation would be required. This testimony established that Marcus had been planning some form of action against me well before our confrontation on the staircase. The documents Linda had prepared showed that he understood exactly how my removal from the company could be accomplished if I were sufficiently injured or intimidated. The prosecution also presented testimony from several employees who had witnessed Marcus's increasingly hostile attitude toward me in the weeks leading up to my accident. They described meetings where he had openly questioned my competence and suggested that my modernization efforts were damaging the company's traditional values. Sarah Williams was particularly effective in her cross-examination of Marcus when he took the stand to maintain his innocence. She confronted him with the enhanced audio recordings and forced him to explain why he had told me that accidents happen in old houses just before I fell down the stairs. Those words were taken out of context, Marcus insisted. I was trying to calm Sophia down because she seemed upset about the board meeting. I was simply pointing out that she should be careful on the marble staircase. Williams pressed him on why he had waited nearly 30 minutes to call for emergency assistance if he had been genuinely concerned about her safety. If you found your niece lying injured at the bottom of the stairs, why didn't you immediately call for help? Marcus's explanation was unconvincing. He claimed that he had initially thought I was unconscious but not seriously injured, and that he had spent time checking her vital signs before realizing the severity of my condition. His account contradicted the timeline established by the security footage and made his delay in seeking medical assistance seem deliberate rather than accidental. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning with a verdict that changed everything for our family. Marcus was found guilty of attempted assault in the first degree, with the jury clearly convinced that his actions had been premeditated and intended to cause serious bodily harm. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison, noting that the evidence showed a calculated attempt to eliminate a family member for financial gain. The conviction sent shockwaves through the business community and validated everything I had endured during the investigation and trial. Marcus's supporters, who had insisted on his innocence throughout the legal proceedings, were forced to confront the reality that a respected business leader had attempted to murder his own niece to maintain control of a family company. Devin, who had stood by his father throughout the trial, found his own position within the company untenable. The board, led by grandmother Eleanor, voted to terminate his employment and remove him from all leadership positions. He was also excluded from future family business decisions, effectively ending his involvement with Blackwood Hospitality. The immediate aftermath of the trial was both liberating and overwhelming. I had been vindicated in the most public way possible, but the cost had been enormous. Our family was permanently fractured, our business reputation was severely damaged, and the financial impact of the scandal had reduced the company's value by nearly 30%. Grandmother Eleanor, despite being in her 80s and having endured months of stress and public scrutiny, threw herself into the task of rebuilding Blackwood Hospitality. She implemented new governance structures designed to prevent any single family member from gaining excessive control over company operations. She also established transparency protocols that required all major business decisions to be documented and reviewed by independent advisors. Most significantly, she asked me to return to my previous role as Director of Operations and to lead the company's recovery efforts. The invitation came with a formal apology from the board for their failure to support me before the assault, and with guarantees that my authority would not be undermined by family politics or personal agendas. I accepted the position with mixed emotions. While I was eager to implement the modernization programs that had been derailed by Marcus's coup, I was also acutely aware that my presence would serve as a constant reminder of the family's violent breakdown. Every client meeting and industry conference would inevitably include questions about the trial and the assault that had made headlines across the country. My first priority was restoring confidence among our existing clients and partners. Many had canceled contracts or reduced their business relationships with us during the scandal, and convincing them to return required acknowledging what had happened while demonstrating that the company had implemented safeguards to prevent similar incidents in the future. I developed a comprehensive communication strategy that addressed the assault directly while focusing attention on the new leadership structure and governance protocols. Rather than avoiding the subject of Marcus's conviction, I used it as an example of our commitment to accountability and transparency in all aspects of our operations. The strategy proved remarkably effective. Clients appreciated the honesty and were impressed by the concrete steps we had taken to ensure ethical leadership. Several companies that had initially canceled their contracts returned with even larger agreements, expressing confidence in our renewed commitment to integrity. The ecotourism project that had triggered the initial family conflict was revived and expanded beyond my original proposal. We partnered with environmental organizations and sustainable tourism advocates to create a model that other hospitality companies began copying. The project not only generated significant revenue, but also positioned Blackwood Hospitality as an industry leader in responsible business practices. Within 18 months of Marcus's conviction, the company had not only recovered its pre-scandal value, but had grown to become the most profitable period in our history. The modernization programs I had implemented created efficiencies that reduced operating costs while improving customer satisfaction across all our properties. More importantly, the new governance structure and transparency protocols became industry standards that other family businesses adopted to prevent similar scandals. We began consulting with other companies about implementing ethical leadership practices and conflict resolution mechanisms that could identify potential problems before they escalated into violence. The Meridian security system that had saved my life was upgraded and expanded to include even more sophisticated behavioral analysis capabilities. We began offering security consulting services to other family businesses, helping them implement technology that could protect against both external threats and internal betrayals. Dr. Chen, who had testified so effectively during the trial, became our chief technology advisor and helped develop protocols that other companies could use to monitor family dynamics and identify potentially dangerous situations before they resulted in violence. The system we created was revolutionary in its ability to recognize patterns of manipulation, intimidation, and escalating aggression within family business environments. 3 years after the trial, I received a letter from Marcus in prison. It was a carefully written apology that attempted to explain his actions without fully accepting responsibility for their consequences. He claimed that business pressures and family expectations had caused him to make decisions he deeply regretted, and he asked for my forgiveness and understanding. I never replied to the letter. While I had moved beyond the anger and fear that had dominated my life during the investigation and trial, I had no interest in providing Marcus with the absolution he was seeking. His actions had revealed a capacity for calculated cruelty that could never be forgiven or forgotten. Instead, I focused my energy on building something positive from the tragedy our family had endured. The experience had taught me that success and security required constant vigilance against threats that might come from unexpected sources. It had also shown me the importance of building systems that could protect vulnerable people from those who might exploit family relationships for personal gain. Last month, I was invited to speak at a conference about family business governance, where I shared the story of how technology had saved my life and helped rebuild our company. The audience of business leaders and family office advisors was fascinated by the practical applications of artificial intelligence in identifying and preventing internal threats. During the question and answer session, a young woman asked me what advice I would give to other family business members who suspected they might be facing similar threats from relatives. My response drew from everything I had learned during the darkest period of my life. Trust your instincts, but verify them with objective evidence, I told her. Family relationships can make it difficult to recognize dangerous behavior, but technology can provide the clarity you need to protect yourself and your business. Build systems that document everything, create transparency in all your operations, and never assume that blood relationships guarantee loyalty or safety. After the conference, the same young woman approached me privately and described a situation in her own family business that sounded disturbingly familiar to what I had experienced. Her uncle had been questioning her role in the company and making subtle threats about her future with the organization. She was worried but unsure whether her concerns were justified. I gave her Dr. Chen's contact information and arranged for Meridian Security to provide a consultation about implementing behavioral monitoring systems in her family's offices. 6 months later, she called to thank me because the AI analysis had documented threatening behavior from her uncle that led to his removal from company leadership before he could act on his hostile intentions. These conversations have become increasingly common as more people recognize that family businesses face unique security challenges that require specialized solutions. The story of Marcus's attempt to murder me has become a cautionary tale that helps other families identify and address dangerous situations before they escalate into violence. Grandmother Eleanor passed away peacefully 2 years ago, leaving me as the majority owner and CEO of Blackwood Hospitality. Her final words to me were about the importance of protecting the family legacy, not just from external threats, but from internal ones that might be even more dangerous. Today, our company is worth more than $100 million and employs over 2,000 people across 12 states. We have become a model for how family businesses can implement ethical governance practices and use technology to create safe, transparent working environments for all family members. Marcus remains in prison and will be eligible for parole in 3 years. I have no interest in opposing his release, but I have also made it clear that he will never have any involvement with Blackwood Hospitality or access to any family business information. The security systems we have implemented would immediately detect and alert us to any attempt he might make to interfere with our operations. The scars from my fall down the marble staircase have faded, but the lessons I learned that night have shaped everything I have built since then. I have created a company culture where transparency and accountability are not just business principles, but survival mechanisms that protect everyone who works with us. Sometimes I walk past the main staircase in Blackwood Manor and remember the terror I felt when Marcus pushed me down those steps. But rather than avoiding the area, I have made it a place of reflection where I remind myself of how far we have come and how much stronger we have become. The chandelier that watched over that terrible night now illuminates a completely different kind of family business, one built on trust, verification, and the understanding that the greatest threats often come from those we least expect. We have turned our tragedy into a foundation for protecting others, and that transformation has made everything we endured worthwhile. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.